The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet farming settlement of New Haven Colony when the ships appeared. Martha Chen was hanging laundry behind her small house, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency despite her 73 years. The white sheets fluttered in the gentle breeze as she hummed an old earth tune her grandmother had taught her decades ago. Martha had lived through the Great Migration from Earth, watched her children grow up on this peaceful world, and buried her husband beneath the alien soil that had become home. Her back ached most mornings, her hands trembled when she was tired, and she needed reading glasses to see the news feeds clearly. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a frail elderly woman living out her final years in quiet contentment. The first sign of trouble came from the animals. The livestock grew restless, lowing and bleating with obvious distress. Birds took flight in massive flocks, darkening the sky as they fled toward the distant mountains. Even the domesticated pets began acting strangely, hiding under furniture and whimpering. Martha paused in her work, one hand shading her eyes as she looked up at the cloudless sky. Her enhanced hearing picked up the low rumble before anyone else in the settlement noticed it. The sound was wrong, not like the familiar hum of human transport ships or cargo haulers. This was deeper, more menacing, with an irregular pulse that made her teeth ache. The ships materialized out of stealth mode directly overhead, their hulls a sickly green color that seemed to shift and writhe in the sunlight. They were massive things, easily the size of city blocks, with weapon arrays bristling along their sides like the spines of some prehistoric creature. Red scanning beams swept across the settlement, cataloging everything they touched. Martha's neighbors began emerging from their homes, pointing and shouting in confusion and fear. Children cried as their parents gathered them close. The local security force, all 12 of them, scrambled to activate the settlement's modest defensive grid, but Martha knew it would be useless against ships of this size and obvious technological superiority. The first transport pods began dropping from the alien vessels, sleek black things that hit the ground with thunderous impacts. The pods cracked open like eggs, disgorging creatures that made Martha's blood run cold. They were tall and angular, with too many joints in their limbs and heads that were just slightly wrong in proportions. Their skin had a metallic sheen, and their eyes glowed with a harsh amber light. These were Kythera raiders, though Martha doubted any of her fellow colonists would recognize the species. Most humans had never encountered them, had never heard the stories whispered in the darker corners of galactic civilization. But Martha knew them well. She had faced their kind before, in places and times she tried very hard not to remember. The Kythera moved with predatory grace as they spread throughout the settlement. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, and they used them liberally on anyone who showed the slightest resistance. The local security forces lasted less than 3 minutes before they were either dead or fleeing into the surrounding countryside. Martha continued hanging her laundry as chaos erupted around her. She moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her movements those of a frightened old woman trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in the face of disaster. It was a performance she had perfected over many years of retirement, one that had served her well in maintaining her cover. A group of colonists ran past her yard, screaming as they fled from a pack of Kythera pursuers. The aliens herded them like livestock, using stunning weapons to drop any who couldn't keep pace. Martha watched from the corner of her eye as her neighbor Tom Bradley fell to his knees, electricity crackling over his body from an alien weapon strike. "Please," Tom gasped, reaching toward Martha's yard. "Help us." Martha met his eyes for a moment, and she saw him register the coldness there, the calculation. His expression shifted from hope to confusion to fear as he realized that the helpless grandmother he thought he knew was evaluating whether helping him would compromise her position. She made the hard choice, the same choice she had made countless times before. She turned away and continued hanging laundry. The Kythera squad leader approached her fence, its weapon trained on her back. It spoke in heavily accented but serviceable human standard, "You old female. Come here." Martha dropped the sheet she was holding and turned slowly, allowing her face to show appropriate fear and confusion. I don't understand. What do you want?" The squad leader's head tilted at an unnatural angle as it studied her. "You will come with us. You will serve our purposes." "I'm just an old woman," Martha protested, her voice quavering convincingly.
I can't work hard anymore.
My bones are brittle.
Surely you want younger, stronger people?
The Kithara made a sound that might have been laughter.
We do not want your labor, Ancient One. We want your terror.
Your species provides excellent entertainment when properly motivated.
2 more Kithara entered her yard, moving to flank her.
Martha allowed herself to be herded toward their transport, maintaining her facade of helpless confusion. She stumbled occasionally, as an elderly woman might, and made small whimpering sounds that seemed to please her captors. The transport was crammed with other colonists, all of them radiating fear and desperation. Martha recognized most of them: the baker who made excellent bread, the teacher who ran the settlement school, the young couple who had just had their first baby. They looked at her with pity, seeing only another victim of circumstances beyond their control. Young Sarah Morrison, barely 18 and fresh from Earth, scooted over to make room for Martha on the hard bench.
"Are you okay?" she whispered. "Did they hurt you?"
Martha accepted the girl's help with apparent gratitude, playing the role of a woman overwhelmed by events.
"I don't understand what's happening," she said in a shaky voice. "Where are they taking us?" An older colonist named Rodriguez spat on the floor of the transport.
"Raiders," he said bitterly.
"Pirates.
They'll probably sell us to the highest bidder in the Outer Rim slave markets."
Martha nodded as if this was new and terrible information, though she knew exactly what the Kithara were planning.
She had read their files during her active years, had studied their behavioral patterns and tactical preferences.
The raiders weren't interested in simple slave trading that was too mundane for their tastes.
They preferred more elaborate forms of exploitation. The transport lifted off with a violent lurch that sent several colonists sprawling. Through the small viewports, Martha caught glimpses of her settlement shrinking below them. Smoke rose from several buildings, and she could see bodies scattered in the streets.
The Kithara were nothing if not thorough in their brutality.
The flight to the main raider ship took only minutes, but it felt like hours to the terrified colonists. They huddled together, whispering prayers and trying to comfort each other. Martha found herself genuinely moved by their courage in the face of the unknown, even as she maintained her emotional distance. The transport bay of the Kithara vessel was a nightmare of rusted metal and poor lighting. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something organic that made Martha's enhanced senses recoil.
Dozens of other transports were docked here, suggesting that New Haven Colony was not the only target of this raid. Kithara guards herded the colonists into holding pens that were clearly designed for psychological intimidation rather than security. The bars were closer together than necessary, the ceiling was uncomfortably low, and strange sounds echoed through the deck plating at irregular intervals. It was designed to break down resistance and hope. Martha allowed herself to be pushed along with the others, but her trained eyes were cataloging everything she saw. Guard rotations, weapon placements, structural weaknesses, possible escape routes. Old habits died hard, even after decades of retirement.
The holding area where they were eventually deposited was already crowded with other captives. Humans from several different colonies, but also members of other species. Some Martha recognized, others she didn't. All of them showed signs of recent capture and processing. A thin human man with haunted eyes approached their group. "I'm Captain Morrison from the merchant vessel Star Dancer," he said quietly. "We were hit 3 days ago. They've been collecting people from all over this sector." "Collecting for what?" asked Sarah, though her voice suggested she didn't really want to know the answer.
Morrison's expression darkened. "Entertainment," he said simply.
"The Kithara sell tickets to their games throughout the Outer Rim.
Rich beings pay good money to watch other species suffer in creative ways."
Martha felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest. She had hoped never to encounter this particular brand of evil again, but the galaxy had a way of dragging her back into situations she thought she had left behind. The Kithara were known for their elaborate death matches and survival challenges, often pitting different species against each other or against dangerous creatures they had collected from various worlds.
Over the next several hours, more transports arrived with more captives.
Martha watched the Kithara guards carefully, noting their routines and behaviors. They were professional soldiers, not thugs, which meant they would be harder to surprise but also more predictable in their responses. The feeding schedule was designed for maximum psychological impact. The captives were given just enough food to maintain their health but not enough to feel satisfied. Water was provided in small amounts at irregular intervals. The lighting in the holding area cycled randomly between too bright and too dim, making sleep difficult. Martha adapted to the conditions more easily than most of the other captives, drawing on decades of survival training that her fellow colonists couldn't have imagined. She rationed her water intake, found the most defensible corner of the holding pen, and established contact with several potentially useful individuals among the other captives. On the second day of their captivity, the Kithera began their selection process. Guards moved through the holding areas, examining captives with the cold efficiency of livestock dealers. They were looking for specific characteristics: physical conditioning, psychological resilience, entertainment value. Martha made sure to appear as unpromising as possible. She hunched her shoulders, exaggerated her tremor, and developed a persistent cough that made the guards move past her quickly. It was a delicate balance. Appearing too weak might result in immediate disposal, but appearing too strong would guarantee selection for the games. The first group of selected captives was taken away amid screams and pleas. Martha knew they would likely never return, or the Kithera were experts at finding the exact point where hope turned to despair. Sarah Morrison was selected on the third day. The young woman looked back at Martha with desperate eyes as the guards dragged her away. "Please," she whispered. "Tell my family I tried to be brave." Martha nodded, though she knew the chances of anyone surviving to carry messages were virtually non-existent. She felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt settling on her shoulders, the same burden she had carried for decades. As the days passed, the captive population dwindled. The Kithera showed no preference for age, gender, or species in their selections. They seemed to choose victims based on some complex algorithm that balanced entertainment value with audience preferences. Martha's continued presence in the holding pen was becoming statistically improbable. On the fifth day, her luck ran out. A new group of Kithera entered the holding area, led by what appeared to be a high-ranking officer. This one was larger than the others, with elaborate scarification covering its metallic skin and eyes that glowed with a brighter amber light. It moved through the pen slowly, examining the remaining captives with obvious expertise. When it reached Martha, it stopped. "This one," it said in perfect human standard, its voice carrying an edge of anticipation. "This one has potential." Martha looked up with appropriate confusion and fear, but she could tell that her performance was not entirely convincing this creature. There was an intelligence in those amber eyes that spoke of extensive experience with human behavior and psychology. "I'm just an old woman," she protested weakly. "Surely there are better choices." The officer's head tilted in that unsettling Kithera manner. "Indeed, you are old. And weak. And alone. Which makes you perfect for our newest attraction." Two guards moved to flank Martha, but the officer held up a restraining hand. Gently, it commanded. "This one is valuable. She must arrive at her destination intact." Martha allowed herself to be escorted from the holding pen with the shuffling gait of an elderly human. But her mind was already shifting into operational mode, analyzing threats and opportunities with the cold precision that had kept her alive through situations that had killed younger and stronger operatives. The corridor they led her through was dimly lit and lined with doors that she suspected led to other holding areas or processing facilities. She could hear sounds from behind some of the doors: screams, roars, mechanical noises that painted a grim picture of what the Kithera ship contained. They stopped at a heavy blast door marked with symbols in the Kithera language. Martha could read them, though she was careful not to show any recognition. The symbols translated roughly to Special Entertainment Facility, authorized personnel only. The blast door cycled open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a chamber that took Martha's breath away despite her decades of experience with alien technology and biology. The space was enormous, easily the size of a sports stadium, with tiered seating rising up into the shadows above. But what dominated the center of the chamber was a massive cage constructed of some kind of energy field that shimmered with deadly beauty. And inside that cage was a dragon. Not a creature that resembled the dragons of human mythology. This was the real thing, a being of such obvious intelligence and power that Martha felt a moment of genuine awe despite her circumstances. It was easily 30 feet long from snout to tail, with scales that shifted color from deep emerald to midnight black depending on the angle of the light. Its eyes were ancient and knowing, and they fixed on Martha with unmistakable recognition of her humanity. The dragon was chained, Martha realized. Massive restraints held it to the floor of the cage, allowing movement but preventing it from reaching the energy barriers that contained it. The creature's condition suggested it had been captive for some time. Its scales were dull in places, and there were obvious signs of malnutrition and stress. "Magnificent, isn't it?" the Kithara officer said, noting Martha's reaction. "We acquired this specimen from the Dracorian Preserve 3 cycles ago. It has proven quite popular with our audiences, though it has shown remarkable resilience. Most creatures break within days of confinement, but this one continues to fight." Martha said nothing, but she could see the intelligence in the dragon's eyes, the way it was assessing her just as carefully as she was assessing it. Dragons were legendary throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and power, but they were also notoriously difficult to capture and contain. The fact that the Kithara had managed to acquire one spoke to their resources and ruthlessness. "Your role," the officer continued, "will be to provide motivation for our dragon friend. You see, the audience grows bored when the creature simply lies there and refuses to perform. But when we introduce a fragile, helpless human into the cage, well, that changes the dynamic considerably." Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the chamber. "You're going to feed me to that thing?" The officer's laugh was a harsh, scraping sound. "Oh, nothing so simple. You see, dragons have a peculiar weakness: they cannot bring themselves to harm truly innocent beings. It conflicts with their fundamental nature. So you will be placed in the cage with our friend here, and the audience will be treated to the spectacle of a mighty dragon tormented by its own conscience." It was diabolical in its cruelty, Martha had to admit. The Kithara had found a way to torture both the dragon and their human victims simultaneously, while providing entertainment for paying customers. The dragon would be forced to choose between its natural protective instincts and its own survival, while Martha would face the terror of being trapped with a creature that could kill her with casual ease. Except that Martha Chen was not the helpless grandmother she appeared to be. "Please," she said, injecting just the right note of desperate pleading into her voice. "I have grandchildren. They need me. Surely someone younger would be more entertaining?" The officer studied her with those glowing amber eyes. "Your terror will be exquisite," it said finally. "And your death, when it finally comes, will serve as a lesson to the dragon about the futility of resistance." Guards moved forward to escort Martha toward the energy cage, but the officer stopped them again. "Not yet," it commanded. "Let her contemplate her fate for a few hours first. Fear is always more potent when it has time to ripen." Martha was taken to a smaller holding cell adjacent to the arena chamber. Through a transparent wall, she had a clear view of the dragon and its prison. The creature appeared to be resting, but she could tell it was actually conserving its energy, waiting for an opportunity that might never come. Over the next several hours, Martha used her enhanced hearing to gather intelligence about the ship's operations. The arena was preparing for a major event. She could hear the crew making preparations, testing equipment, and discussing security protocols. Whatever was being planned, it would happen soon. The dragon seemed to sense her attention. It turned its massive head toward her holding cell, and, for a moment, their eyes met through the transparent barriers. Martha saw something in that ancient gaze that gave her hope, recognition, calculation, and perhaps even the beginning of a plan. She had spent decades in retirement, playing the role of a harmless elderly woman. But sometimes the galaxy demanded that old skills be dusted off and put to use one more time. The Kithara thought they had captured a helpless victim, but they were about to learn that appearances could be fatally deceiving. Martha Chen began to plan. The arena filled with spectators as the appointed hour approached. Martha watched through her transparent cell wall as beings from dozens of different species took their seats in the tiered galleries above the energy cage. Most were wealthy merchants, crime lords, and thrill-seekers from the outer rim worlds, but she spotted several individuals whose presence surprised her. high-ranking military officers from supposedly respectable governments, corporate executives from major trading consortiums, even what appeared to be diplomatic representatives from several core worlds. The dragon market was apparently more lucrative and far-reaching than even Martha's old intelligence files had indicated. A Kythera technician approached her cell carrying what appeared to be medical scanning equipment. "Hold still, Ancient One," he commanded as he activated his devices. "We must ensure you are healthy enough to survive the initial encounter." Martha submitted to the scanning with appropriate fearfulness, but she was actually relieved by the procedure. Her enhanced physiology had been designed to pass casual medical inspection, but close examination could reveal the modifications that had been made to her skeletal structure, nervous system, and muscle density. Fortunately, the technician was looking for signs of disease or injury, not evidence of military augmentation. "Remarkable," the technician muttered as he reviewed his readings. "For a human of your apparent age, your bone density and cardiovascular function are quite robust. You should provide excellent entertainment before succumbing to terror-induced cardiac failure." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" Martha asked with the bitter humor of someone facing certain death. The technician's expression might have been amusement. "Comfort is not our concern, Ancient One. Duration of entertainment is." Through the wall, Martha could see crews making final preparations to the dragon's cage. Additional restraint fields were being activated, and she noticed that several new weapon emplacements had been installed around the arena. The Kythera were taking no chances with their valuable property. The dragon itself remained motionless, but Martha's enhanced vision could detect subtle changes in its breathing pattern and muscle tension. The creature was preparing for something, gathering its strength despite the restraints that held it. Whatever plan it had formulated, the time for action was approaching. A new figure entered the arena floor, clearly a senior Kythera official based on the elaborate ceremonial armor and the deference shown by the guards. This one carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to command, and his scarification patterns indicated high rank within their military hierarchy. "Greetings, honored guests," the official's voice boomed through the arena's sound system. "Welcome to tonight's special presentation. As you know, we have in our possession one of the last free dragons in this sector of the galaxy. For months, our audiences have enjoyed watching this magnificent creature struggle against the inevitable reality of its captivity." The crowd stirred with anticipation. Martha noticed that many of the spectators were leaning forward in their seats, already savoring the promised entertainment. "Tonight, however, we offer something unprecedented. We will introduce a fragile human elder into the dragon's domain, creating a moral dilemma that will torment our prisoner far more effectively than any physical torture. Observe as a creature of legendary power is reduced to helpless anguish by its own compassionate nature." Martha felt a cold rage building in her chest. The casual cruelty of using empathy as a weapon against both her and the dragon was exactly the kind of sophisticated evil that had driven her to join the intelligence services decades ago. Some beings in the galaxy needed to be stopped, and the Kythera definitely qualified. The official gestured toward Martha's holding cell. "Our human subject is a 73-year-old female, selected for maximum psychological impact. She possesses no combat training, no enhanced abilities, and no hope of survival against a creature of such power. Yet the dragon's nature will compel it to attempt her protection, leading to exquisite internal conflict." Guards approached Martha's cell as the energy barrier deactivated. She allowed herself to be escorted toward the main cage while maintaining her facade of terrified helplessness. Her legs shook convincingly, and she stumbled several times in a way that drew sympathetic murmurs from some of the more decent beings in the audience. The dragon's cage was even more impressive up close. The energy barriers hummed with power that made Martha's teeth ache, and she could feel the heat radiating from the containment field generators. The space inside was roughly circular, perhaps 50 meters in diameter, with a sandy floor that showed signs of previous occupants who had not survived their encounters. As the guards prepared to transfer her into the cage, Martha caught the dragon's eye again. For just a moment, the ancient creature's gaze flickered toward a specific section of the arena wall, then back to Martha. The movement was so subtle that she doubted anyone else noticed it, but the message was clear: the dragon had identified a weakness in their prison. The energy barrier flickered and opened just long enough for Martha to be pushed through. She stumbled deliberately and fell to her knees in the sand, playing the role of an elderly woman overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion. The barrier reactivated immediately, trapping her inside with 30 feet of predator. The dragon raised its massive head and studied her with those ancient, intelligent eyes. Up close, Martha could see the individual scales that covered its hide, each one the size of her palm and harder than military armor plating. The creature's breathing was carefully controlled, and she could sense the enormous strength coiled within its body despite the restraints that held it. "Do not fear, small one," the dragon said, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate through Martha's bones. "I will not harm you, regardless of what these monsters desire." The crowd above them erupted in excited chatter. Many of the spectators had never heard a dragon speak, and the intelligence in its voice clearly surprised them. Martha noticed several beings leaning forward to capture recordings of the exchange. She remained on her knees in the sand, maintaining her performance while assessing the situation. The dragon's restraints were more sophisticated than she had initially realized. In addition to the physical chains, there were neural inhibitor fields designed to disrupt the creature's natural abilities. The Kithara had clearly invested significant resources in ensuring their prisoner remained contained. "I'm sorry," Martha whispered, her voice carrying just the right note of helpless guilt. "I'm sorry they're using me to hurt you." The dragon's expression softened slightly. "You are not responsible for the evil of others, grandmother. Your presence here is not your choice." Martha felt a genuine pang of guilt at the deception she was maintaining. The dragon's compassion was real, its desire to protect her authentic. She was manipulating a being whose only crime had been falling into the hands of monsters. The Kithara official's voice boomed through the arena again. "As you can observe, the dragon's protective instincts are already engaged. But let us see how those instincts fare under pressure." Hidden panels in the arena walls slid open, revealing weapon emplacements that began tracking the dragon's movements. Martha realized with growing horror that the Kithara intended to torture the creature while she watched, using her presence to prevent it from defending itself effectively. Energy bolts began striking the dragon's hide, each impact drawing a roar of pain and fury from the ancient creature. The attacks were carefully calibrated to cause agony without permanent damage, designed to continue for as long as the audience remained entertained. The dragon strained against its restraints, desperate to reach Martha and shield her from the spectacle of its suffering. But the chains held firm, and the neural inhibitors prevented it from accessing its full power. All it could do was endure while the crowd above cheered each successful strike. Martha felt her carefully maintained emotional control beginning to crack. This was worse than simple torture, it was a violation of everything decent and honorable in the galaxy. The Kithara were using love itself as a weapon, turning the dragon's noble nature against it. She had to act. Rising slowly to her feet, Martha allowed her facade to slip just slightly. Her posture straightened, her tremor disappeared, and her eyes hardened with cold determination. It was a subtle change, but the dragon noticed immediately. "You are not what you appear to be," it said quietly, its voice barely audible above the crowd noise and weapon fire. "No," Martha replied simply. "I'm not." She began walking toward the dragon, moving with a steadiness that belied her supposed age and frailty. The creature watched her approach with growing fascination, recognizing that something fundamental had changed in their situation. "What are you, grandmother?" the dragon asked. Martha stopped just beyond the range of the dragon's chains and looked up into those ancient eyes. "I'm someone who's very tired of watching good beings suffer at the hands of evil ones." The weapon fire intensified as the Kithara operators noticed that their human victim was not behaving according to script. Energy bolts began targeting the area around Martha, trying to drive her back into the center of the arena where her terror would be more visible to the audience. Instead, Martha continued toward the dragon. When an energy bolt struck the ground near her feet, she didn't flinch. When another passed close enough to singe her clothing, she didn't even pause. She walked with the steady purpose of someone who had made peace with death long ago. "The restraint control systems," the dragon said urgently. "They're built into the arena wall at bearing 273. But, the neural inhibitors dash are calibrated for your species, Martha interrupted.
Not for mine.
She had reached the dragon now, standing within the radius of its chains. Up close, the creature was even more magnificent, its scales reflecting the arena lights in patterns that reminded her of Earth's aurora. But, it was the intelligence in its eyes that truly impressed her, ancient, wise, and unbroken despite months of captivity. Martha placed her hand against the dragon's snout, and the creature's eyes widened in surprise. Through her palm, the dragon could feel the steady pulse of her augmented nervous system, the controlled circulation that spoke of military enhancements, the bone density of someone who had been prepared for combat in high-gravity environments. "Who are you?" the dragon whispered. "Someone who should have stayed retired," Martha replied. Then, she smiled, and the expression transformed her weathered face into something far more dangerous.
But, retirement was getting boring anyway.
The crowd above them was growing restless. The human was supposed to be cowering in terror, not calmly conversing with their prize attraction. The Kithara official gestured angrily toward the weapon operators, demanding increased pressure on both prisoners. Energy bolts began striking closer to Martha and the dragon, but neither of them moved. The dragon seemed to be drawing strength from Martha's presence, its own breathing steadying as it recognized that it was no longer alone in its resistance. "The control systems," the dragon said again. "I can break the physical restraints if the neural inhibitors are disrupted. But reaching the wall requires dash, I know," Martha said quietly. "Trust me." She turned away from the dragon and walked toward the arena wall, her movements still steady despite the increasing weapon fire. The energy bolts were coming closer now, the operators trying to herd her back toward the center of the cage where she would be more vulnerable. Martha had spent 40 years in the intelligence services, much of it in situations where survival depended on reading the tactical situation correctly and acting with precise timing. She could feel the rhythm of the weapon firing patterns, the slight delays between targeting adjustments, the microsecond windows when movement was possible. She reached the arena wall without taking a direct hit, though her clothing was smoking from several near misses. The control panel the dragon had indicated was exactly where it should be, protected by what appeared to be a simple electronic lock. The lock lasted approximately 3 seconds against Martha's enhanced fingers and decades of experience with alien security systems. The neural inhibitor array powered down with a cascading series of electronic failures that echoed through the arena's sound system. The dragon's roar of triumph was felt as much as heard, a sound of pure joy and fury combined that made the entire structure vibrate. The crowd above them fell silent as the dragon began to change. Without the neural inhibitors suppressing its abilities, the creature's natural power began to manifest. Its scales brightened from dull green to brilliant emerald, then began shifting through the entire spectrum as energy coursed through its body. The physical restraint chains, designed to hold a weakened prisoner, began to strain against forces they were never meant to contain. The Kithara official was screaming orders now, demanding that security forces flood the arena and that the weapon systems target both prisoners for immediate termination. But his commands were lost in the chaos as the dragon's power continued to build. Martha pressed herself against the arena wall as the first restraint chain snapped with a sound like thunder. The dragon surged upward, no longer held down by the neural dampening fields, and its roar shook dust from the arena ceiling. The energy barriers that contained the cage began to flicker as the dragon's power interfered with their operation. Martha could see panic spreading through the crowd above as beings realized that their entertainment was about to become a very real threat to their safety. A second restraint chain parted, then a third. The dragon was free now except for one final chain around its neck, and that was beginning to glow with heat stress as the creature's power tested its limits. "Stand clear, grandmother," the dragon called to Martha. "When I break free, there will be consequences." Martha looked up at the crowd of beings who had paid to watch her die for their amusement, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Good," she said simply. The final chain snapped. What happened next would be remembered throughout the Outer Rim for decades to come, though the surviving accounts would vary considerably depending on who was telling the story. The dragon's roar of freedom was said to have been heard on ships 3 sectors away. The arena walls, built to contain the most dangerous creatures in known space, lasted less than 30 seconds against a truly enraged dragon. But Martha Chen, who had started the day as a harmless grandmother hanging laundry in a peaceful farming settlement, was no longer thinking about destruction. She was thinking about all the other captives still held in the ship's holding areas, all the other beings who deserved to go home to their families. The dragon's rampage was magnificent, but it was also just the beginning. As emergency alarms began wailing throughout the Kythera vessel, Martha was already moving toward the arena's exit. She had work to do, and, for the first time in decades, she felt truly alive again. The galaxy was about to remember why humans had once been considered the most dangerous species in known space. And it was going to start with one supposedly weak grandmother who had finally stopped pretending to be harmless. The dragon's escape triggered every security protocol the Kythera vessel possessed. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the ship, automated defense systems came online, and armed response teams began converging on the arena level. But the raiders had never planned for a scenario involving both a fully empowered dragon and a human intelligence operative working in coordination. Martha moved through the chaos with deadly efficiency. While the dragon's rampage drew the attention of every security camera and response team on the ship, she slipped through maintenance corridors and service passages that she had memorized during her captivity. The decades of retirement had not dulled her instincts. If anything, the forced inactivity had left her eager to demonstrate skills that most of the galaxy thought were myths. Her first objective was the weapons locker she had spotted during her initial processing. Kythera security forces used standardized equipment, and Martha's intelligence training had included extensive familiarization with alien weapon systems. Within minutes of leaving the arena, she was armed with a particle rifle and enough ammunition to level a small building. The holding areas where the remaining captives were imprisoned lay 3 decks below the arena level. Martha made her way downward through access shafts and emergency corridors, avoiding the main passages where security teams were rushing toward the dragon's location. The ship's artificial gravity was fluctuating as the creature's power interfered with the vessel's systems, making movement challenging even for someone with her enhanced balance. She encountered her first patrol near the prisoner processing center. 3 Kythera guards were moving in formation, their weapons drawn and their attention focused on the sounds of destruction echoing through the ship. Martha waited until they passed her position before emerging from the shadows behind them. The engagement lasted less than 5 seconds. Martha's particle rifle spoke 3 times with surgical precision, and the guards dropped without ever seeing their attacker. She relieved them of their access cards and communication devices, then continued toward her objective. The holding areas were in chaos. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows through the corridors, and the sounds of the dragon's assault on the ship's superstructure echoed through the deck plating. Many of the captives were crying or praying, convinced that their situation had somehow become even worse than before. Martha accessed the first holding pen using a stolen security card. Inside were 12 humans from various colonies, all of them showing signs of the psychological processing that the Kythera used to break their prisoners' spirits. They looked at her with confusion and hope as she opened their cell door. "Listen carefully," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority. "This ship is under attack. You have approximately 15 minutes to reach the escape pod bays before this vessel suffers critical systems failure. Follow the emergency lighting toward the stern, stay together, and don't stop for anything." One of the colonists, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, stepped forward. "Who are you? How do you know about escape pods?" Martha was already moving toward the next cell. "Someone who's very good at reading tactical situations. Go now, before the security teams regroup." She worked her way through the holding area systematically, freeing captives and directing them toward the escape route she had identified. Humans, Centaurians, vegan merchants, even a small group of crystalline beings whose language she didn't recognize but whose gratitude was unmistakable. Each group received the same instructions: move fast, stay together, head for the escape pods. The dragon's assault on the ship was intensifying. Through the deck plating, Martha could feel the massive creature tearing through the vessel's superstructure, seeking out critical systems with the intelligence of a being that understood starship design. The main power grid fluctuated repeatedly, and she could hear secondary explosions as damaged systems began cascading failures throughout the ship. Her enhanced hearing picked up the approach of another security patrol before they came into visual range. This group was larger, at least 6 individuals moving in tactical formation. Martha positioned herself at a corridor intersection and waited for them to come to her. The Kythera patrol entered her kill zone with military precision, but they were expecting to face panicked prisoners, not a trained operative with superior positioning. Martha's particle rifle carved through their formation with methodical efficiency, dropping the lead elements before they could take cover and forcing the survivors into a defensive position that gave her multiple firing angles. The engagement lasted longer than her previous encounters, nearly 30 seconds, but the outcome was never in doubt. Martha's augmented reflexes and decades of combat experience made her functionally invisible to opponents who weren't expecting human military capabilities. She was reloading her weapon when her enhanced hearing detected a new sound, the distinctive whine of charging energy weapons approaching her position from multiple directions. The Kythera were adapting their tactics, bringing heavier firepower to bear against what they now recognized as a significant threat. Martha smiled as she checked her ammunition supply. She had hoped to avoid a prolonged firefight while captives were still escaping, but sometimes the galaxy didn't cooperate with optimal planning. The approaching security teams were about to discover why human special forces operatives had once been considered the most dangerous individuals in known space. The battle that followed would later be studied in military academies throughout the core worlds. Martha Chen, using nothing but stolen weapons and 40-year-old training, held off 3 full security teams while positioned in what should have been an indefensible location. Her use of corridor geometry, ricochet angles, and psychological warfare turned a simple holding area into a fortress that the Kythera couldn't breach. But, even as she fought, Martha was aware that her primary mission was succeeding. Through the ship's communication network, she could hear reports of escape pods launching from the vessel. The captives were getting away, returning to their families and their lives instead of dying for the entertainment of monsters. The Dragon's assault reached a crescendo as it discovered the ship's main reactor complex. The creature's roar of triumph echoed through the entire vessel as it began systematically dismantling the containment systems that held the reactor core stable. Martha felt a moment of genuine admiration for the being's tactical intelligence. Rather than simply destroying the ship, it was ensuring that the Kythera crew would have to choose between escaping immediately or dying in a reactor breach. Through her stolen communication device, Martha could hear the Kythera command staff issuing evacuation orders. The Dragon's attack had crippled their ability to maintain the ship's critical systems, and the continuing escape of their prisoners was eliminating the cargo that made their raid profitable. The logical choice was to abandon ship and cut their losses. But logic and pride were different things, especially for a species that built its reputation on ruthless efficiency. The Kythera commander was ordering his remaining forces to converge on Martha's position for one final assault. If they couldn't save their ship or their cargo, they could at least eliminate the human operative who had turned their victory into disaster. Martha checked her ammunition count and grimaced. 3 magazines left, plus whatever weapons she could salvage from the guards she had already eliminated. Against the kind of force the Kythera commander was assembling, it might not be enough. Then, she heard something that made her smile again, heavy footsteps approaching her position from behind, accompanied by the distinctive sound of claws against metal deck plating. The dragon appeared at the end of the corridor like something from legend. Its scales were still glowing with residual energy from its rampage through the ship's systems, and its eyes held the satisfied expression of a predator that had successfully defended its territory. It was magnificent and terrible and absolutely lethal to anything that threatened it. "Grandmother," the dragon said in its deep, rumbling voice. "I believe you could use some assistance." Martha lowered her weapon and allowed herself a moment of genuine relief. "I thought you might be busy tearing this ship apart." "The reactor core will achieve critical failure in approximately 12 minutes, the dragon replied conversationally. "More than sufficient time to deal with any remaining opposition before we depart." The approaching Kythera forces rounded the corner at that moment and found themselves facing not just a human operative, but a fully empowered dragon in a confined space. The tactical situation went from challenging to impossible in the span of a heartbeat. The final battle was brief but decisive. Martha's precision shooting combined with the dragon's overwhelming power made short work of the Kythera assault force. The aliens had been expecting to overwhelm a single opponent through superior numbers, but they had never planned for a scenario involving human-dragon cooperation. When the last guard fell, Martha and the dragon stood alone in the corridors of the dying ship. Around them, emergency systems wailed warnings about critical system failures and reactor instability. The vessel that had terrorized peaceful settlements and enslaved innocent beings was finally meeting its end. "The escape pods," Martha said. "We need to dash." "Already arranged," the dragon interrupted. "I took the liberty of securing transportation for both of us while you were occupied with the opposition." They made their way to the launch bay where the dragon had prepared their escape. The creature had not only located a suitable pod but had also loaded it with several items from the Kythera captain's personal collection, items that would serve as evidence when they reported the raiders' activities to the proper authorities. As their escape pod launched from the dying vessel, Martha looked back at the ship that had been her prison. The dragon's assault had left it crippled and powerless, drifting in space as its reactor approached critical failure. Soon it would be nothing but expanding gas and debris, taking with it all evidence of the horrors it had contained. "The other captives?" she asked. "Did they all make it out?" The dragon's expression was satisfied. "Every one of them. I monitored their escape trajectories before beginning my assault on the reactor. They are all safely away from the vessel and transmitting distress beacons. Rescue ships will find them within hours." Martha nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For the first time in decades, she had been able to save everyone, not just complete the mission, but actually bring every innocent person home alive. Behind them, the Kythera ship finally achieved reactor breach. The explosion was visible from several light-years away, a brief star that burned out the darkness of space before fading to nothing. With it died one of the most notorious raider crews in the Outer Rim, along with their ship full of horrors. "So," the dragon said as they settled in for the journey to the nearest civilized system, "what does a retired human intelligence operative do for an encore?" Martha considered the question seriously. Her cover was blown, her retirement was over, and the galaxy had just been reminded that humans were capable of remarkable things when properly motivated. There would be consequences to consider, reports to file, and probably a very uncomfortable conversation with her former handlers in the intelligence services. But there would also be families reunited with loved ones they thought they had lost forever. Children who would grow up free because their parents had been rescued from slavery. Entire species who would sleep more safely because one ship full of monsters was no longer prowling the space lanes. "I think," Martha said finally, "that I'm going to stop pretending to be helpless." The dragon's laugh was like distant thunder, warm and rich with genuine amusement. "I believe the galaxy will find that very interesting indeed." Their escape pod continued through space toward safety, carrying two beings who had learned that even the most impossible situations could be overcome through courage, intelligence, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. Behind them, the expanding cloud of debris that had once been a Kythera raider ship served as a reminder that evil, no matter how sophisticated or powerful, could be defeated by those who refused to give up hope. Martha Chen was no longer a retired grandmother living quietly on a farming colony. She was once again what she had always been beneath the surface, one of the most dangerous humans in known space, and someone who had just reminded the galaxy why that might be a very good thing. The dragon beside her was no longer a captive creature tormented for the amusement of monsters. It was a free being with the power to reshape worlds and the wisdom to use that power wisely. Together, they represented something that the criminals and predators of the Outer Rim had forgotten: the consequences of underestimating those who seemed weak but were actually strong, those who appeared helpless but were anything but. The galaxy would remember their names, and the story of what happened when extraterrestrial raiders made the mistake of shoving a seemingly weak grandmother into a dragon cage. It would be remembered as a lesson about the dangers of judging by appearances, and about the terrible price that evil beings paid when they finally encountered those who were willing to fight back. But, for Martha Chen and her dragon companion, it was simply the end of one adventure and the beginning of whatever came next. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of beings who preyed on the innocent and the helpless. They would not be doing so unopposed for much longer.